It is good to see all of you tonight. I guess I really didn't ask your opinion, but nobody offered it to me. So, anyway, I'm smiling, by the way. I don't know if you can see my face, but I appreciated the fact that we were able to progress Sunday. It felt good to me to feel like we made progress in the book of Luke by adding it back to our Sunday morning approach. And so I hope that'll be a good thing for us as we kind of move through. Somebody asked me just a moment ago whether or not I'd get through all of Luke chapter 9 tonight. My answer to that was not a chance. It's huge. There are lots of verses there. But we'll get a good ways, I think, in our study as it relates to this book and appreciate some of the things that Jesus has to share with his disciples. When Herod the Tetrarch had found out about the things that Jesus was doing, and some folks had come and had a conversation with him about that. So he begins to ask, well, what are they saying about him? And what was the response? Yeah, some say it might be John the Baptist, and Herod's initial reaction to that is what? No, that can't be because I'm the one that had his head taken off. So that can't be. And then others were saying what? Maybe it's Elijah or one of the other prophets. Then later, Jesus is having a conversation with his disciples, and he asks the same basic kind of question. Whom do they, the crowds that have been gathering around, who do they say that I am? And what was that? What did the apostles tell Jesus that the crowd was saying? The same thing, right? So that idea that this was that Jesus was a reincarnation of either John the Baptist or one of these other prophets was a common kind of concept that people had, because they knew he had power, they knew he was different, they knew the obvious things they were witnessing and seeing about him. They just couldn't accept the fact that he was whom? The Son of God. They're not there yet, right? Even his own disciples are still struggling with some of those concepts and what that means, and so they're still dealing with that. Then Jesus asks a more important question. He says, well, that's what the crowds are saying, and then he looks at his apostles and says, whom do you say that I am? And what was the response of the apostles at that point?
Peter said, Christ of God.
Yeah, say it again, Jim.
So Peter said, Christ of God.
Yeah, he is. You are the Christ. He says, that's who you are. You're the Christ. You're the one that we've been waiting for. You're the one we've been longing for. And they, at least through Peter here in this particular point, appreciates who it is that Jesus actually was. Now here's the challenge. In verse 21, he straightly charged them and commanded them to tell no man that thing. And we talked a little bit about that Sunday, about the fact that it's interesting that one minute Jesus will tell people, go and tell what happened, and in other moments, he'll tell them not to say anything. And they're just not quite ready to kind of expedite, if you will, the knowledge and the confirmation of who Jesus is, because there's still a lot of things that have to happen. So, verse 22. He says, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be slain and be raised the third day. And so Jesus basically says to them, listen, we're not ready to just go and full tilt declare the fullness of what I'm here for and what I'm about and who I am, because there's a lot of things that have to happen leading up to the ultimate end of the work that I have in store for me. And so he wants them to appreciate that there's still a lot to come, even though it'll all kind of happen in a short span of time. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Did the apostles have a hard time accepting that statement?
And I imagine that they did have a difficulty in trying to grasp all that he had to say about that, and especially when he starts talking about their willingness to self-deny and that kind of conversation that they're going to have here in a moment. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in Matthew's account of this a similar situation, Peter does have trouble with what Jesus said concerning what was going to unfold.
Yeah. Not to interrupt you, I apologize. So there are moments where his disciples, they don't like the idea of the message Jesus brings, especially when it comes to the fact that he's going to die on a cross and then ultimately ascend back to the Father. So there are going to be those kinds of challenges. Go ahead, Bob.
I get the impression leading into this that it's like Christ doesn't want them preaching him being the Christ, him being the Messiah. Because it's like a crescendo, his death, and all these are going to come forward and show to the people who he is. And that's what I was thinking. Sure.
And I think that probably that's what he does have in mind, right? He's working to an end point, and it's not time for that end point yet. And so he holds them back and reserves them in the kinds of things they're going to do and say until that point actually unfolds, in some senses, on its own, right? When the jealousies kick in among the Pharisees and the leadership among the Jews begin to press to bring out the ultimate demise of Jesus, it'll happen in its own time, and we're not quite ready to just go declare that message in its fullness yet.
In some spots, saying like, hearing they won't understand, and seeing that they won't, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I think that is happening here, right? There are going to be moments where they hear what Jesus says, and they may understand it in the sense that they could understand him if he says, I'm going to die. They could understand the literalness of that, but they didn't understand its purpose. They didn't understand the magnitude of what was going to unfold with that death. They didn't understand or appreciate. There are lots of things that I might have a definitive or literal kind of understanding of that I may not really understand in its fullness. And I think that's probably kind of what he's driving at. They'll hear the message, and it's not that they're unintelligent in their ability to know what it is he said. They just can't connect the dots yet. And we're not quite there yet. Go ahead.
They were hearing with human reasoning too, and not, able to think of it spiritually.
Right. Their thought processes are very earthly still, and so they have yet to really be able to fully grasp the spiritual messaging, if you will, that's behind. And we know that to be true, and we've referenced it many times in our study, because they're waiting really for Jesus to be put on what kind of throne? An earthly kingdom, right? That's what they've been longing for and hoping for. Let's just restore you back to David's throne. Everything will be great. And just really did struggle with the spiritual nature of the messaging that Jesus had. Go ahead, Danny.
You mentioned Matthew, and I just want to share a couple, few verses here. The 16th chapter, when Jesus asked that question, Simon Peter in verse 16 answered and said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. But Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus Christ.
And so there are multiple occasions and records of how Jesus interacted with his disciples, and their limited work early on. And then once the fullness of everything Jesus had to accomplish occurs, Holy Spirit enters into the picture in Acts chapter 2, right? And now all of a sudden, now they're preaching a fullness of the message of Jesus. Yeah, absolutely. So he says to them, verse 23, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. It's interesting that Jesus illustrates this basic point when he says that if a man won't deny himself and take up his cross daily, and let me ask this question, what do you think he means by what is this? We say it sometimes. We say, well, you got to deny self and take up your cross daily. What does it mean to take up your cross daily? What are we doing when we take up our cross daily?
Live the life.
Okay, I hear something is right.
Live the life.
Okay, to live the life.
I mean, it's a continuing thing. blessing.
So let me ask it this way. When you think about Jesus, we think about him literally, right? Picking up his cross. And when you think, if I say the word cross, what's your immediate thought, right? It's that wooden structure that Jesus had to bear, even as he was going to his own death. He had to carry his own cross. The weapon of his death, he had to carry and bear it as he headed to his own death. Now, here's the point I think that sometimes maybe, when I hear that imagery then, a man's got to pick up his cross daily. When you serve Jesus, what do you have to carry with you along the way? All of your daily issues, right? When we follow Jesus, there's no promise that all of those daily things that are going to come up in life, all of those basic challenges and life issues that come up, he didn't say they're just going to go away. What he says is you're going to have to carry those daily while you deny yourself and while you follow me. And I think that's going to be evident when you think about those kind of parables that he teaches as it relates to those who made excuse as to why they wouldn't follow him. They weren't willing to pick up their cross and follow. They wanted to go deal with their daily issues, and then we'll come and address you, Jesus. And Jesus says, no, it's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for folks who are willing to bear those daily challenges and still follow me. Not try to make a disconnect between the two and say, well, I'll go spend my time over here with my daily issues, and then I'll find some time for Jesus. As we follow him, we got to kind of carry the cross along the way.
As with Christ, and it could be with us, the cross symbolizes sacrifice. And that has to be part of our living.
When you think of that symbol of the cross, it empowers or embodies that idea of sacrifice, which we have to do as well. Go ahead.
His word tells us how to face those daily challenges. Tells us how to handle them. So we do need to. It tells us how to handle those daily challenges.
Yeah, not a promise to remove them from us, but a promise on how to handle them as we strive to follow. And the truth is, he gives us a better understanding of how to handle them as we follow him, rather than trying to go it alone. And that's a faith issue, right, that we've got to kind of commit to. Go ahead.
I wonder what they thought when he mentioned cross, because that was before he was put on the cross. I wonder what those people were thinking then.
Yeah. Well, before he was put on a cross, but they were familiar with the method. Yeah. The idea of somebody being hung on a cross was not new the day that he and those two malefactors went out and were crucified at Calvary. It was something they would have known and appreciated and understood as it relates to that. But that's a good question. Any other thoughts, comments? I think I grabbed every hand. Go ahead, Marlene.
I always thought that this meant to live your life, your Christian life every day, not one day a week.
Right. And I think that's true, that there is this need for us to, that's the extra part, right? To daily, continually, that following Jesus isn't a momentary thing or an occasional thing, but following Jesus is a daily thing that we engage in and commit to.
Service.
Yeah. It is a lifelong effort to be able to honor and serve him. I think I grabbed everyone. So keep reading. So then he adds, for whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. In simple terms, you give up the earthly for Jesus, he's going to give you what? Yeah, he'll give you the heavenly. He'll give you the eternal. If you'll make the earthly sacrifices, which are the temporary ones, then he'll reward it. So you give up this life, you'll save the eternal one. You pursue this one, and you'll lose the eternal one. And that's the imagery that Jesus is just trying to get us to see.
And as, when you combine the thoughts we've been discussing, Jesus would show all this in a matter of time of literally taking up the cross, literally losing his life, and then ultimately being ascended into heaven. He was not only teaching these things, but he ultimately would be the first to do all that.
He becomes the first fruits of all this sacrifice that he's challenging his disciples to appreciate. For what is man advantage? Verse 25. If he gain the whole world and lose himself, or be a castaway. Some other books that reveal this same concept say, man, what shall a man gain if he gain the whole world and what? Loses his own soul. You lose the very essence of who you are. What have you really gained? And that's right. He says you could gain the whole world, but if you lose your soul in the process, you've really gained what? Nothing.
And our people today is trying to do that.
Yeah, there are folks and here's what's interesting. I could gain all of it and still be left empty because I lose my soul. And the truth is, we sell our souls away for far less than the whole world. Men often sell their soul out, if you will, deny faith in God and in Jesus for far, far less than everything the world had to offer. They're picking a fraction of that world and saying that little fraction of the world is more important to me than Jesus is. And they lose their souls over far. So Jesus goes to the extreme, right? He says you can gain it all. So you can't place a value on it. You can't place a dollar figure on it and say, well, it'd be worth it if I had $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $100 million, whatever. No matter what the number is, you can't get to one that is more valuable than your soul. And you can't get to one that would bring you more benefit than the eternal life that Jesus is offering. And so the challenge we have is to make these daily sacrifices that he's been talking about, be followers of his, daily cross bearers, because the end reward of that is far greater than anything the world can have to offer. The challenge of that is that I can see what the world has to offer, right? With my physical eyes. I can see what the tangible things that this world is offering to me. And when we can see them with our physical eyes and they're more tangible to us, they're more tempting for us to pursue. Eternal things and heavenly things have to be seen with what kind of eyes? Yeah, eyes of faith, and with spiritual longings and a willingness to recognize that what I haven't seen with my physical eyes, what I haven't touched, what isn't as tangible to me, has to be more important. And that's hard, right? But yet it's a principle, I think, that you could illustrate even in worldly terms, where if you're willing to be patient, something greater can come. If you're willing to wait, something more beneficial could come. You know, do you want $20 today or a quarter every day for the next 10 years? Well, I didn't do the math on that, but I'm going to trust that the quarter a day is going to outweigh the 20 now, right? But that's not what we see. What we see is the $20 bill waved in front of us, and we grab it because that's in the here and now. And that's kind of what the struggles we have sometimes with our faith. We have struggles trying to look towards heaven and stay focused on the eternal benefit that is to come because we see those tangible temptations that are put before us from the world. And we've just got to remind ourselves that I could get it all. I could have Jeff Bezos and you know, you name it, anybody else's money combined, and it still won't amount to the benefit that Jesus is offering if I'll pursue and follow him. It's something that by the eye of faith we got to commit to.
Just verse 24, there's something that always sort of crossed my mind, or I wondered about. But when he said there, whosoever will save his life shall lose it, I've often wondered about those who are being persecuted, and that I'm not a disciple of Christ, and save my life in that sense, if that may be sort of in regard to what Jesus is saying here. I don't know.
I think, Danny, some of them will be called upon to be willing to literally lay their lives down for his cause. Again, sometimes Jesus uses extremes to illustrate everything in between. We may not have to literally lay our life down, but we do need to give our lives over to him. So he uses an extreme. But there will definitely be some of his disciples, some of the men he's talking to, were going to end up losing their lives because of their following of Jesus.
Body, self, same as the soul. Are they interchangeable?
Say that one more time.
Is the soul or yourself interchangeable with the soul?
Go ahead, you're good.
If the soul is not happy, then the body is afflicted. If the soul is happy, then so is the body. Because you suffered for that happiness. Is that what that verse is meaning?
That's not what I saw. Is that a fair answer to that question? I kind of get what you're driving at, but that wasn't what it's not what I see here.
Matthew and Mark about the soul, and Luke using the word self, or self is the same as your body.
Yeah. So you're referencing, and I think I'm finally, because the other records say if a man gain the whole world and lose his own soul, and this text says and lose himself. I don't think he's using the word himself referencing the body in that verse. I think when Luke records him, when he uses the word and lose himself, what's the essence of man? It's not this shell. It's not the body. The essence of me is the soul that resides within me. Well, the question is, are not body and soul the same while we live on the earth? Is that am I understanding the question right? And I would say no. I think my soul is my soul and spirit, and if you can discern those, it's, the Bible says that's a pretty sharp sword that can do that. I think he's saying if you don't deny self, if you back up, if you don't deny yourself in verse 23, and then the thought continues, if you're unwilling to make those kinds of sacrifices in order to follow Jesus, if you pursue selfishness, if you pursue selfish ambitions, then you'll lose the soul as it relates to eternal benefit. Yeah. Again, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just not seeing what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I'm not seeing it here. That's not what I see here. Yeah, now we'll run it. We'll run it another time. But you're good. No, I get it. I'm not arguing. I'm just not seeing it the same way here.
Regardless, whether it's in eternal punishment or eternal life.
Yeah, the soul is the permanent part, right? The soul, the body is the temporary part. The soul is the eternal part, and it will certainly live on, irregardless of its end result, and its eternal state will be determined about the decisions that soul makes. I mean, my body doesn't make decisions. My soul, my mind, is what tells my body what to do. And so the soul bears responsibility in relationship to that. For whosoever, he said, verse 26, shall be ashamed of me and of my words, of him shall the Son of Man be ashamed, when he shall come in his own glory and in his Father's, and of the holy angels. But I tell you of a truth, there be some standing here which shall not taste death till they see the kingdom of God. And so he challenges them to make the sacrifices necessary to be genuine followers of Jesus. He reminds them that if you are embarrassed by me here, then how can I honor you when I come in glory? If you can't embrace who I am as I walk among you, then shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he shall come in his own glory and in his Father's and of the holy angels. And so whether they're willing to get past all of their trepidations or concerns or the difficulties of following one that men generally may not want to follow because of all the lack of royalty that surrounds Jesus, the lack of doesn't have a place to live, he doesn't none of the appeal that normally surrounds people wanting to follow other men is there with Jesus. And if you're ashamed of that and are unwilling to make the sacrifices to follow me, when I come to bring greater power and greater glory, how can I extend that if you were embarrassed now as it relates to me? And he reminds them that kingdom will come in a short order, because there will be some of them, he didn't say all of them, but he said some of them standing right there at that moment would be present when the kingdom of God would come. And we can appreciate the fact that when Jesus promises this coming kingdom, and his early messaging, it relates a lot to the kingdom that he would be eventually establishing, a spiritual kingdom that all nations could flow into and that there would be no stranger in, and all those conversations surrounding it. And it frames for us a time period, because any who would argue that the kingdom has still yet to come, and by the way, there are those today that argue that. They may not even realize they're arguing it, but much of premillennialism surrounds the idea that God intended to usher in the kingdom when Jesus arrived, but the Jews rejected Jesus. That wasn't supposed to happen, and so we're going to put that on hold. We're going to put the church in its place, so the church will exist for a period of time. Then Jesus will come back again. When he comes back again, he'll start the kingdom all over. He'll reign for a period of 1,000 years. And so there are folks who have attached themselves to that premillennialist mindset that I would ask simply, what do you do with what Jesus said here in verse 27? When he looks at that audience and says, the kingdom is going to come while some of you standing here are still going to be alive. And so either it did or it didn't. And if it did, then that kind of takes that premillennialist thought out of the equation. If it didn't, then Jesus did what? Yeah, he didn't tell truth when he tells this audience of men. And to kind of argue that, well, that was what was supposed to happen, but it didn't happen, almost insinuates that God didn't know what he was doing, and that somehow God failed. And that doesn't seem to be consistent with who God is. And so just keep that in mind, that there were those present with Jesus in that moment who he said they would see the kingdom come. And I think when you study the New Testament, we don't have time for that pursuit tonight, but I think you'll see that body of believers are referred to in multiple ways. When you're talking about royalty and kingship, it's referenced as a kingdom. When you're talking about how it functions, you talk about it as a body. When you think about it as a called out group of people, you'll see the Bible refer to it as a church. But it's all what? It's all same group. They're all the same group. There's just different definitions. the definitive nature of those things differ. And so you might use kingdom because you're referencing the idea of that kingship and authority. You might reference it as a body because you're talking about how it's going to work and function. Or you might refer to it as the church because you're talking about those who've been called out of sin in the world into that body. And so those words may be used for different definitions or definitive reasons, but they're all referencing one group of people. And Jesus says they would be seeing that kingdom of Jesus come. Thoughts, questions to that point? All right, let's take one more piece of this narrative, and let's talk a little bit about this moment of transfiguration, or at least what we often refer to as the transfiguration of Jesus. So it comes to pass, about 8 days after these things, he took Peter and John and James and went up into a mountain to pray. And as he prayed, the fashion of his countenance was altered, and his raiment was white and glittering. And behold, there talked with him 2 men, which were Moses and Elias. Now, remember, Luke's getting his knowledge from whom? Other witnesses, right? He's getting his understanding from others. He's inspired. We've already made that point in the introduction of our study of Luke. But he's talking to other people, and he's getting their perspectives. There were only 4 people present physically in this scene. Jesus, Peter, James, and John. Peter, James, and John, after they have this moment, do what? They go and tell other people about what they'd witnessed. And they see 2 men, and the conclusion is made that they are seeing Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which he should accomplish at Jerusalem. Pause button for a moment. Did you ever notice that? When you're looking at the account of the Mount of Transfiguration, we get caught up in the magnificence of this transfiguration. Jesus is transfigured, and he's got this glory and this way that he looks. And we oh yeah, Moses and Elijah were there, and Peter wanted to do what? He wanted to build a temple or a tabernacle to honor each one, and we get caught up in the story that we miss what they were talking about. Did you see that? When they appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which should accomplish at Jerusalem. Moses and Elijah and Jesus aren't just visibly present, they're having a conversation. And the conversation was evident enough to those who were present that by the time Luke records this, he records for us that conversation was about the coming crucifixion of Jesus. The Mount of Transfiguration is not just this extraordinary moment, but it may also be the very first moment that you start getting clarity about how Jesus is going to die and how he's going to depart from this world and leave. Peter and those that were with him were in a heavy sleep, verse 32 says. And when they were awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men that stood with him. You can almost vision, they've gone up into this, he's left everybody else behind. He's only taken these 3 with him. And they get up there, and they're exhausted from the day. They're exhausted from this hike, and they're weary of that, and they're asleep. And then they get woke up by this, this amazing scene that is before him. And it came to pass, as they departed from him, Peter said unto Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias or Elijah, and not knowing what he said. Was Peter being sincere and in human senses, did it make sense? Sure, right? It made sense that he might want to build a monument for each to commemorate what just happened. But he's going to have a conversation about Jesus as to whether that's what Jesus would want more importantly, what God the Father would want. And Lord willing, we'll come back into that study on Sunday morning.